I'm Virginia Eskin. If I had a penny for every time I heard someone say, "I wish my mother had made me practice," I'd be a rich woman. I hear it all the time from doctors, lawyers, even plumbers. Today we'll visit with a couple of gifted amateurs who can't live without music. On a note to you. We live in a stressful age, and we all need ways to reduce stress. Some of us garden, some of us sew, and some of us just plunk down on the piano bench. The scientists tell us that endorphins are released when we do things that we really like to do, and music can be one of them. Lots of professionals in other fields, I happen to be a professional pianist, head for the piano when they get home from work, and a couple of them are going to visit with us today on the program. Dr. Paul Buttenwieser is a psychiatrist, and Martha Sosman is a judge. They're both excellent pianists, and I'm going to talk with them about what music does to help them release pressure. But first, I wanted to put our program in a little historical context. We're going to play some flute music that was composed by Frederick the Great, who was king of Prussia. This was happening in the 18th century, the Age of Reason. Fred came from a cultured family. His grandfather had definitely a big interest in the arts, but then, as so often happens, his son was not as interested in the arts. He was more of a military man, more of a ruler. And then when Fred is born, the third generation, he sort of mirrored his father's adoration for the arts, but his father made him submit to becoming a sort of a statesman and a ruler, and tried to send him to military school and tried to drum the arts out of him. So his father adored the arts. His father thought the arts were okay, and young Fred really liked the arts, and in particular music. So he definitely is well trained. His mother makes sure that he has lessons and everything, and I guess she sort of stood up for him in terms of his music education. And the father makes him go to military school, and somewhere along there, when he's about 16, he hears the important composer Quantz, who composed about 100 flute sonatas. And that's the point at which young Fred decides that's the music for him, in particular the flute. So it's interesting that the opposite influences of his grandfather and father eventually make him a very wonderfully balanced ruler. Well, let's listen to the first movement of his C major flute concerto. I think it's a very chirpy work. That was the first movement of Frederick the Great's Flute Concerto in C, played by Manfred Friedrich with the CPE Bach Chamber Orchestra conducted by Harmut Henken. I'm Virginia Eskin, and our program today is all about gifted musicians who just happen to be holding down significant jobs outside the world of music. Our next guest, Martha Sosman is a Superior Court judge in the state of Massachusetts, and she's our guest. Welcome to our show, Martha.
Thank you.
Now, you obviously have a great passion for the piano. When did that get turned on?
Well, I started taking piano lessons in childhood, like many of the neighborhood children did, but I was unexceptional in my progress as a child. I really caught the bug when I was in college. I happened to have some wonderful teachers in my college years, and in my final year or two of college was really in a great growth spurt at the piano. That gave me the momentum to carry on after I left college and went to work.
Where was college?
Middlebury College up in Vermont.
And undergraduate level, were you interested in the law then?
Not specifically. I majored in history and French with no particular career ambitions in mind at the time. Certainly none in music.
I'm just tempted. So when did the passion for law strike?
That was a little bit later. I was interested in many things and was debating the law, among other things, and ultimately chose law about 4 years later after I graduated from college.
And would you say that playing the piano reduces stress for you? Does that do what people say, it takes you to another place in life? Or how does it manifest itself in your case?
Well, I've found that shifting gears to play the piano is simply shifting gears to something so totally different from what I do during the day. I have, like you, constantly heard this reference to, oh, it must be so relaxing. And I agree, there is nothing relaxing about playing the piano. What it does do is it is so demanding of your attention and focus and energy that for those of us, I think, in other jobs who might be inclined to take the worries of the job home with us, sitting down to play at the piano forcibly puts my attention and my focus on something else and breaks the cycle.
I
if
love
you
that
will.
because it really becomes then a meditation. Or for people who do sports, playing golf can be taken to a very high level. And what you're saying is sort of an irony that concentrating very hard, but it's on something that you don't do during the day. You do it, that actually is a release.
Yes, I think it shifts gears. I think it clears the air. It is thrilling and exhilarating to play. It's very exciting. It's a lot of hard work, as you know. But because it's on something so totally different, it feels like a break.
But enormously rewarding.
Yes.
Well, reward us with these beautiful Andante variations that you want to play by Haydn. That was Martha Sosman, who happens to be a judge, playing the Haydn F minor variations. I think you did a beautiful job on that.
Thank you very much.
How much, in terms of hours of practice, does that represent?
Well, as you know, it represents a lot. One can never quantify the hours of practice in a particular piece. You'd have to start tallying them up from the day you started studying piano.
But I was impressed that you still take lessons.
Yes.
That's a good thing.
Yes.
Just like a coach keeps their serve getting ever better with tennis. Or my dream is to go study with Alfred Brendel in London.
Well, I think particularly for amateurs, a teacher helps keep you focused. And each lesson that you take is a little goal to get ready for that lesson. And since we are playing with tremendous competing demands on our time, that goal of trying to get a particular piece or a particular movement or a particular passage improved and ready for the next lesson is this sort of little baby step, little mini step on the way to actually performing.
Do you have a monthly lesson? Or
It's been varying at the moment. I've just discussed it with my teacher. I'm going to take a lesson approximately once every other week. It's about two a month.
Oh, that's quite dedicated. Now, are you preparing for a concert in the near future?
Not in the immediate near future. I'm working on some new repertoire and have to sort of see how that comes along and how soon it comes along to be ready to go on a public performance.
What are the pieces?
Well, I do not lack for ambition. I've started working on the Chopin B minor sonata. For an amateur, a very tall order. It's a big project. It's a long-range project, but someday I will play it.
Hardest thing is the first run, starting on that G and not falling into a pile of pudding. Well, now you're going to play a beautiful piece. It's a transcendental etude, isn't it?
It's one of the concert etudes.
Concert
actually.
etudes.
Yes.
By Liszt.
Yes, the concert etude in D flat, un sospiro.
Which means sigh. another beautifully played piece by Martha Sosman, who's a judge in real life and a pianist also. Pianist by night, judge by day.
Yes.
I thought you handled that very beautifully. I was watching your hands, and anybody who couldn't see them wouldn't be aware. Demonstrate how the melody is done with the two hands. Can you do that? Da, da, da,
Yes, you have to trade back and forth. It's left hand, right hand, left hand, right hand, and yet make it connect, so it doesn't sound like it's being picked out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, it reminded me a little bit of Chopin's Aeolian harp.
Yes, it's very similar to that Étude.
Same kind of rippling, going to heaven sort of effect. When you sit down every day, Martha, do you start off with a Chopin Étude, or what's your drill for warming up?
I actually usually work on things that are part of the pieces that I am working on, a particular passage or something, working on it slowly or hand separately or something like that to warm up.
What we call a trap.
Yeah.
You identify the traps and then
I think
fix them.
one of the things that amateurs have to do is learn how to practice with the utmost of efficiency.
Well,
we all do.
Everybody.
But particularly amateurs, and so I usually try to focus in on particular technically difficult parts of pieces I'm working on, warm up with little segments of those, taking them apart, but do that for the warm-up.
You don't do one particular kind of Haydn or Czerny? You don't do some kind of little velocity drill?
I really don't. Not normally. Mm-hmm. Not normally.
You jump right in to a problem area?
Yeah, I jump right in, but say slowly. I'm not playing something right up to tempo or anything like that.
That's very damaging to the hands.
Very damaging. Yeah. So I warm up, but I warm up using material that is from pieces that I'm working on.
Is that something that got put in place by a teacher when you were at Middlebury College? Or because it sounds like a very conscious thing that you're doing. This, most people play Bach, say, a prelude and fugue, or my teacher, Gina Bachauer, insisted that I play a Chopin Étude. And then Liszt father took it one step further. He made him transpose a Bach prelude and fugue every day in a different key. So then I do a Chopin Étude in some other key, because by now they're kind of boring to me. If you play them in other keys, they're new problems. But that's interesting to me that you go right, you attack sort of a sore, as it were, and hope to cure it.
Yes. Cure it, or just say by warming up using it, it means I'm making a little bit of progress on the repertoire that I'm trying to get under control.
Another issue, I think, for home pianists, because I used to teach at an elder hostel camp, and a lot of people have memory problems, but you don't. You seem to be fearless. You're flying without a net, and I've seen you perform publicly. That memory was never a problem for you?
Well, it's always a disaster waiting to happen, but so far it has not been a problem for me. I prefer to play from memory. I memorize early. Some teachers say a little bit too early. I can lose fine points that are in the score by memorizing a bit too soon and relying on memory while I'm practicing rather than looking at the score.
That's interesting. Do you think that you have an eye or an ear memory? Or maybe both?
I think what I have, as best I can figure it out, is a music theory memory. I remember where things are going.
Form.
I remember harmonically what's coming up, that this is going to B flat seventh, or this is an arpeggio it's going to be a this.
Structure is driving your bus, sort of, rather than melodic line. You're like an architect. You're building with blocks, as opposed to just letting the melody carry you.
In terms of memory, yes, I remember harmonically where it's going. I find that helpful when there are those little stumbles and slips. If you know what you're headed to,
it's true.
That's a signpost something you can grab right onto.
No, it's like being on a highway and you take the wrong exit, and if you have a vague idea of where you are, you can get yourself back on the highway.
Yes. Amateurs are very afraid of playing from memory. It's a major stumbling block for many of them. but it's I don't know. It's a little bit like there's a big difference between riding a bicycle with and without training wheels. I think you just have to take the training wheels off and learn how to balance the bike.
Good
Once
metaphor.
you do, it's a lot more fun to ride a bike when it's just two wheels on it.
Terrifying.
Yeah.
In a moment, we're going to hear another piece played by Martha Sosman, who has a life as a judge. But first, I'd like to let you know how to get a hold of me. Our address is a note to you, care of WGBH Radio, 125 Western Avenue, Boston, Massachusetts, 02134. The email address is a note to you at wgbh.org. And when you write, please let us know the name of your public radio station. A note to you is made possible by the friends and alumni of Northeastern University. Let's go back to Martha Sosman. Now tell me, what are some of the issues for you with this Debussy piece?
Well, the piece itself is very pictorial. It is a great example of impressionistic music, and it's reflections in the water. I think the piece starts, the water is smooth and clear, the reflection is very sharp and very clear, and things happen to the surface of the water, wind and light and things dropping into the water, and you hear the reflection shift and change and move around. And finally, at the very end, I think it just gets dark and the reflection disappears. It's a piece that is very much an impressionistic painting.
Beautiful. Debussy's Reflets dans l'eau. perfect.
Thank you.
Martha Sosman, judge by day, pianist by night, or vice versa. It's just lovely. And I think the way you depicted it was very true. I played that piece many times, and I never thought of the weather aspect of it, the way you said that, the weather sort of, but where it works itself up into a little sort of like plus que vent, or the piece that Debussy wrote about the wind. Mm-hmm. It has that quality. I think you should enter the Van Cliburn competition for amateur pianists. I'll put you up.
Well, if I need a sponsor, I'll look to you. They just started that again.
Yes. And I think you should enter it. It's every 4 years. So.
Well, there's a goal. Talk to my teacher.
No, you're ready to do it. Well, thank you so much, Martha, for coming in and sharing your passion and your obvious gifts. And I wish you well. Every time I sit down at the keyboard, I'm going to imagine, I don't think I could put on your robe and be a sitting judge as well as you sit down and be a sitting pianist.
Well, you've probably never tried it.
I've watched. Thanks to Martha Sosman for joining us on A Note to You to tell us about her life as a judge and to share with us her music gifts.
Thank you very much for having me.
Before we hear from our next guest, who's Dr. Paul Buttenwieser, here's a little Wagner to cleanse our palate, and I'll tell you why we're playing Wagner in a moment. You might be wondering what Wagner has to do with gifted amateurs, which is the theme of this week's program, On a Note to You. Our guest coming up is an expert at arrangements of orchestral pieces, and he likes to play Wagner at the piano, believe it or not. I'm speaking with Dr. Paul Buttenwieser, who's a well-known psychoanalyst. And you tell me you're a novelist, too, and a musician. Welcome, Paul.
Hello, Virginia. It's very nice to be here this morning.
Well, let's have some good fun using music as the conduit. How do you involve yourself with music every day?
Well, first of all, I'm one of those lapsed musicians who doesn't do it every day because life is very hectic, and there are many days that I don't get home until much after my playing time these days. But I do try to have some time after I get home to play. I've gone fairly far beyond working pieces up for public consumption anymore, so I have the great luxury of playing only for my own pleasure, and just a very few times during the year at family occasions when I play for others. But mostly it's just for myself. And I like to come home and I do work on a few things once in a while, but what I really like to do is just read through some of the literature, particularly the literature that is beyond what I used to play when I was really playing seriously.
You grew up in New York City?
I did.
Took lessons from a very fine teacher, Constance Keene.
That's right, yes.
And in those days, you dreamed of being a musician?
Oh, yes, I was programmed to be a musician as a child. I was a child prodigy, so to speak, at least in my parents' minds, and I took lessons and devoted a lot of time to that. And then in my adolescence, I decided that I really was interested in conducting, which is why I have one of my hobbies at the piano is to sit down and play orchestral scores, particularly.
That's the Wagner connection.
The Wagner connection,
And
that's
then
right.
how did you get into psychiatry? That's a
Well,
stretch.
I was a serious pre-professional musician until about my mid-teen years, and then I decided that for various reasons I really didn't want to go on in music professionally. I wanted it to be a large part of my life, but I really wanted to have it be an avocation rather than a profession. And so I had to cast about for something else to do.
Was there some pivotal event, a competition that broke your heart?
No,
or some...
no. Actually, there was. We had my sister died at around that time. It was a very difficult time for the family, and I think I had a sort of a crisis of confidence in life in general, and certainly in being a performer for pay. I think I decided that I really didn't want to live with that kind of tension, that I wanted also to have art be a big part of my life, but my professional part be in one of the service professions.
Now, how does it manifest itself, your love of Wagner? Can you show me what you flirt around with?
I used to, as a child, my piano teacher, actually one of the reasons I got interested in conducting is my piano teacher, Constance Keene, used to complain that I put so much more zest into my playing just off the cuff. I didn't actually do this terribly formally, but she used to complain that I played these big orchestral scores with a lot more kind of gusto sometimes than I did the miniature things that we were
naturally,
working on.
You were being timpani.
That's
and
right.
Horns and basses.
That's right. Of course, what I liked about it was you could get the whole idea without being very careful about anything that you were actually doing.
Like,
well, for example, in Meistersinger, which you were playing just as I was coming on, you could do this part that I always loved as a boy. And of course, you noted, and I assume the listeners did, that the scales were not tremendously wonderful, but you can do that when you're playing an orchestra reduction.
I think even when orchestras are thwacking away, there's some spurious scale work. I was chatting with our guest before you, Martha Sosman, who's a judge by day and a pianist when she has the energy at night. And she surprised me because her daily routine does not include playing Bach or Chopin the way I was trained. And you're going to play a little Bach allemande for us. Mm-hmm. Is that something that you like to start with?
I always like to start with Bach. For one thing, I enjoy it. For another thing, I like to sort of read through the preludes and fugues. And for a third thing, which is probably the most important, I once read Pablo Casals is quoted as saying he always starts the day off with one of the preludes and fugues as a benediction on the house. And I always loved that. So I always really like to start off with Bach.
Well, bless us. Our guest, Dr. Paul Buttenwieser, is going to play the Allemande from the G major French Bach suite. like the way you track with all the incidentals. There are many of them. That was Paul Buttenwieser, who's my guest today, and we're doing a show on gifted amateur pianists. And I don't think I would choose that Bach piece as a little ditty, Paul. Tell me about the ornamentation, because it was unusual.
Well, my teacher, Constance Keene, her teacher and later husband, Abram Chasins, was, I traced my lineage back to Joseph Hoffman. He was a protege of Hoffman. And he was something of a musicologist for the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and he was a collaborator to some extent of Wanda Landowska. So he was really in the early days of what was then thought of as authentic Bach. It was what we would consider now a very romantic Bach. And this is really what I was weaned on in my
flowery.
early days.
I liked it. And you're coming before the note. You know, a lot of your mordents and umschlags and stuff are before the downbeat. So it makes it crazy, though, to memorize.
Well, of course, I don't always do the same thing every time.
Good.
But
That's the
this is a piece dating back to my mid-childhood, and so I like to play it the way I played it then. It's sort of fun. I think I probably play other Bach that I didn't study so young in a more up-to-date manner.
What do you think about Andras Schiff? He's a big Bach player nowadays.
I adore him. I adore his Bach. And he played a wonderful recital alternating Bach and Bartók without a break between the numbers. You could almost not tell where Bach stopped and Bartók took off. It was a fascinating take on the modernity of Bach, I thought.
Timelessness.
Yes.
And where do you stand on somebody like Glenn Gould?
Well, he's one of the all-time greats. One of a kind, a tremendous eccentric. I love that he recorded the Goldberg Variations twice, at the beginning and at the end of his career, and they're almost two different people playing, you would almost say. But another one of the greats. I didn't like every single thing he did, but I loved his Bach.
I'm laughing because I think he would have been great fodder for you as a psychiatrist. You put him on the couch and have a field day.
I think he would have run away from me as fast as his legs could take him.
So you brought us another nice piece. What is it?
Well, of course, Chopin is the heart of all of us, and I think I play more Chopin than everything else put together. It's one of the great delights, again, of being off the performing circuit to be able to play anything you want, which for me means Chopin, Chopin, and Chopin. And I'm going to play the Waltz in C sharp minor.
pretty.
Thank you.
I liked your inner voices.
Well, that's, of course, back to the Hoffman days.
Right. I recognized little
Yes.
trailing thumb there.
Yes.
Did you hear him play?
Never in person. No,
You're too. You'd have been too young.
Yes,
and he
young.
was not playing by
Yeah.
the 50s. Well, I can hear Joseph Hoffman's fine touch there.
Well, thank you. He is my great-grand teacher, and of course, in those days, he was considered, I think, along with Rachmaninoff, the great figure of the first half of the 20th century in piano. And there was this school of Chopin playing with a lot of inner voices brought out, perhaps more so than today.
I think we should return to it.
Well, a little of it goes a long way, and it's very nice to hear once in a while.
Who's playing do you most admire, Paul, of Chopin on the circuit today?
Well, of course, we had Garrick Olson here last year, and he is sensational. I am a great fan of Pollini.
I love what Pollini does in the encores.
Yes.
He seems very uptight during the concert, rather not frigid, but everything's in place.
Everything is in place, yes.
I'm not crazy. Mm-hmm. And then it's like he gives himself permission to be very flowery and expressive in the
Yes.
encores. It's almost schizophrenic.
Well, I just treasure some of his performances so much, and I have a lot of his CDs, which I really like.
Very high matrix at
Yes.
work there. I'm talking with Dr. Paul Buttenwieser, who's a psychoanalyst or a psychiatrist by day. You mentioned that you're also a novelist.
That's right.
Are you writing a book about music and
I am.
medicine?
Well, no, not about music and medicine, but I am writing a book about a musician right now, yes.
Oh, a thriller?
No, not a thriller, just a plain ordinary novel.
Nothing you do is ordinary. But it interests me, how do you, psychologically, how does music nurture you, Paul?
Well, as a former serious pianist, I cannot really envision life without actually making the music. I love to go to concerts. I love to hear CDs. But for me, I have to be at the piano and actually playing for it to be really something that I own. Particularly, of course, the piano literature, and as I said, some of the orchestral literature that I hear. I recently heard the Brahms Alto Rhapsody, and it was wonderful to be able to come home and play that heavenly C major passage on the piano. It just makes it so much more rich and meaningful for me.
It's true. You key in not only to the genius of Brahms, but it reaffirms you, Paul, as a living person that you can play that.
That's right.
Martha, our previous guest, said an interesting thing, and I'd be curious if you agree that she finds that playing the piano takes her to this sort of other place. You know, they talk about endorphins being released, and there's an irony in that because something that's so hard to do, why is it considered relaxing? It's not relaxing so much. It's that she put it beautifully that suspends you into another kind of time zone.
Well, I think it does, perhaps not from the physical activity such as we get in exercise, but I certainly consider playing music a Schubert impromptu. That is comfort food for me. I mean, it is such solace. It's such balm. I don't know about, even as a doctor, I don't know whether endorphins are released, but something is definitely released.
Do you lose yourself? I mean, your wife calls you for dinner and you're in a wonderful
My
world?
wife doesn't call me for dinner while I'm playing the piano,
She knows better.
and I love food.
Well, thank you so much for coming.
It's been lovely to be here. Thank you, Virginia.
Great. To finish out our story on gifted amateurs, this is our last one. Did you know that Charles Ives was a successful businessman in the insurance business, but that he, of course, is a very serious composer? Did you know that, Paul?
I did, indeed.
Yeah.
In fact, at his funeral, I understand a lot of the insurance people were standing around saying, "Hey, did you know that Charlie was also a composer?"
Shocked insurance knobs. Well, he loved puns and musical jokes. And we know, of course, that his father was a bandmaster. And when Charles was young, he loved to put himself right where the two marching bands would, when they were practicing. And that was the most cacophonous moment. And he loved that, apparently. And his father noticed that he was always standing right there with the two marching bands. And it's like a train wreck in music. You have Battle Hymn of the Republic and
Columbia, the Gem of the
right,
Ocean.
it's all moiling down together. So we're going to listen to one of his little musical jokes. It's called Tone Roads, which of course is a pun on Tone Rose, and it's played by the New York Philharmonic with Leonard Bernstein conducting. That ends our show today on Gifted Amateurs, and we thank Martha Sosman and Paul Buttenwieser for coming in and sharing their passion for music. We get engineering help from Janie Pippick. Our producer's Alan McClellan, and I'm Virginia Eskin. A Note to You is made possible by the friends and alumni of Northeastern University. It's produced by Northeastern University in cooperation with WGBH Radio, Boston.